planning task as well as a national policy instrument. I'm very happy that today I'm not alone, and I have the support of Susanne Böhle, which you can also see on the webcam. She's working at Ruprecht Consult at the moment and will give us a particular insight into the challenges and approaches for urban mobility planning at the local level. While I afterwards will present more and will go deeper into the role of national level authorities and how they are connected with the elaboration of urban mobility plans. So, and after our two presentations, which will take about 40 to 45 minutes, we will have some time to answer a few questions still. Okay, first let me give you a short technical introduction. We are using the GoToMeeting software, and as you have probably all found out, you cannot speak and the others can't hear you. This is because I have muted all of you to reduce any audio interferences. You can use this little small red arrow in the top left corner of the software to minimize that window so it will not disturb you during the session. And those two other buttons can be used to activate or deactivate the webcam. During the session, also the webcams of the participants will be turned off, so that yeah, we can use this later on in the discussion. It will yeah, be more useful then. Okay, and in the case to introduce you how you also can participate in our webinar today, we always had good experiences with sharing any questions via the chat function. So you can simply type these questions later on there in the discussion. If you're interested in some particular topics, you may already formulate your question maybe during the presentation, and we will take them up later on. Later on in the discussion, also it will be possible that you formulate a question or a particular issue via the microphone. So in that case, I would also ask you to just send a short message via the chat function, and I will activate your microphone then. But this all, we will see how much time we have for the discussion. So we will see then. And now I would like also already to hand over the control to Susanne, and she will give us her presentation on the more practical challenges at the local level. I will do that. This may take a short second, and I will have to activate your microphone, I think, Susanne. Let me do this. Okay.
So I see I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Matthias, for the introduction. And as Matthias said, I would like to give you a, let's say, 30-minute presentation about the local SUMP or urban mobility planning as a local planning task, and the challenges which are related with sustainable urban mobility planning. And thank you for joining us, and also for your interest into this new form of urban transport planning, and also for sharing your experience maybe afterwards in the forum. As Matthias already said, I'm working for Ruprecht Consult, which is a consultancy which works almost 10 years for SUMP, mainly in the context of EU projects. So what we all have in common is the rising awareness that we need really a change of our mobility pattern. So a lot of cities are facing major problems to provide and to organize an urban transport system due to specific local conditions. But one major problem is the amount of cars and the motorization in general. And this is something you might see here, and you might know from your own experience. You can see in several huge metropolitan areas where a lot of cars cause major problems within the city. So besides that, transport is a key enabler of economic activities and social connectivity. You're also facing a lot of sustainability challenges, such as climate change, air quality, safety issues, security and efficiency and use of resources. But what we see as well is that there's a growing awareness of cities around the world about the benefits of investing in sustainable mobility solutions. Let's look a little bit into more detail into the situation in Europe. And in Europe we are facing, let's say, the same situation all around the world, that we have growing urban population, and with a growing urban population and with a growing population density, there's a focus on the question how to design infrastructure and how to provide public transport services and how to ensure accessibility. So looking at the dimension of impacts of car and of motorized modes in the urban area, we see that there are a lot of problems due to the exposure to air pollution. A lot of people live in streets that face major air quality problems. A lot of people spend a lot of time waiting and in congestion, and spend a lot of time going to work. And also there's also the problem that people can't sleep well because they're exposed to nighttime traffic noise. That is only the one side of the coin, because what we see as well, that a lot of cities, especially in Europe, are also facing the challenge of transforming the urban mobility system. And what we see is that especially in larger areas like Paris or Barcelona or Amsterdam, there is a rising awareness that also walking and cycling and public transport has a major role, should play a major role in the public transportation system. So all in all, we are facing kind of a situation where a lot of things are moving forward. And with this moving forward, new goals and also new planning practices come into the focus. So I would like to give you a little bit of an EU policy context. So what it's all about, what is the background to talk about new methodologies and new approaches in urban transport planning. So European leaders have set very ambitious targets to tackle climate, environmental and energy problems, and even they only address on the national level, on the national government side, with the white paper on transport, they firstly address also to urban transport issues. And for example, they would like, so they set a goal that in 2050 only half half of the use of conventional fueled cars should be in 2050, or we should achieve a CO2-free city logistics in major urban centers. As a very strategic instrument to address those goals and also to address local transport problem, sustainable urban mobility plans has been formulated as to be a very strategic instrument. And various EU policy documents mention this instrument being very important in future, like the Transport White Paper or the Urban Mobility Package, which was released in 2013. So SUMP, or Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning, is an instrument to meet European policy targets and to solve local transportation problems. And the EU recommends to all member states to develop national legal framework for SUMP and to support cities in their efforts to address their local problems by more comprehensive planning processes. The EU also facilitates Europe-wide coordination and funds research and innovation activities in order to improve planning practice and planning approaches on the local level. And what we see is as well that the quality to have an SUMP is increasingly a precondition to attract urban transport funding from the EU inclusive structural and investment funds. So what we see for the next 10 years is that sustainable urban mobility planning will become more mainstream. In 2014, together with the Urban Mobility Package, SUMP guidelines have been released, have been published, which give a clear orientation how to come up with a comprehensive planning process, or what is the difference of a comprehensive planning process like SUMP in comparison to more traditional planning approaches. Very crucial in this context is the planning cycle for sustainable urban mobility planning. You might also be familiar with a policy cycle which says you have you start with the goal setting, you are talking about visions and measures, how to achieve your goal. You think about what kind of measures should be implemented, and how should I measure those? How should I measure my activities, and what can I learn from that, and how to improve the planning processes. So this kind of circles thinking is reflected here also with the planning cycle. And what it should be is, it looks probably quite complicated, but it should help you to structure a complex and a very integrated planning process by 4 quadrants of a planning circle, which says there is a planning, a preparation phase by formulating planning goals and visions for the city, by a rational goal setting, selection of measures would address your local transportation problem. Then really to set up a plan and to implement the plan, and at the end the evaluation and the monitoring of the plan. And all steps, in all those different steps, certain procedures should be followed, like to work in partnerships and to engage the public and local stakeholders, the private sector as well as the public sector. What we also see is that from previous projects and in close collaboration with cities, that cities are facing a lot of challenges, not only with SUMP but also with other planning processes in their cities, especially when they want to carry out a very comprehensive and a very transparent planning process. They're facing problems or challenges which are related to participation, which means to actively involve local stakeholders and citizens in the planning, in the mobility planning process. Institutional cooperation is something very crucial. It says you should not only focus on the city center, but you should focus on the area, your mobility area, which means you have to think about it. You have to think across your borders. You might need partnerships with other communities. You need a partnership within your administration and a close dialogue with your political body. So institutional cooperation is quite a major issue. A core of each SUMP as being the plan, the heart of a mobility plan are the measures you assume which can tackle your mobility problems. But how to identify the most appropriate measures, how to design packages of measures, and how do I come to those measures which have a high political commitment in my city. And last but not least, monitoring and evaluation. How do I assess the impact of measures, and how do I evaluate my planning process? Please let me go into a little bit more into detail into these four challenges. And how, like you can see, we have here identified in which part of the cycle you are facing those kind of challenges, and what you see here in color, that all those different steps you are facing those kind of challenges: participation, cooperation, measure identification, or evaluation challenges. What we see, or what we find out, is that for participation there's often a lack of political will and a low priority given to participation. It's also seen as a risk or disturbance. And a major reason for that, not to carry out a participation process, are limited financial and personal capacities, including knowledge and good practice. And there's also low awareness of strategic transport planning among citizens and stakeholders groups. So what could be promising approaches? So to develop a local participation policy with guidelines and a dedicated participation plan can help. You can adapt participation formats, capacities, target groups, and planning phases. So methods to, and what also is important, to develop methods to critically assess your participation process. Let me give you an example, let's say a case example where we see some very strength points from this what I've just would have just mentioned, to actively engage stakeholders and the citizens into the planning process. And this is the development of the Transport Master Plan in Bremen. And the aim was to open the black box of transport planning. So, and they really set up a really very holistic participation process. They had a very clear plan of who to involve and at what stage at the participation process. They had a project advisory board for quality control, a citizen discussion forum and information. And they also have an online consultation tool with 35,000 visitors and proposals within 3 months, which gives the city a lot of work, but also a lot of recommendations what could be done better in the city. And the whole SUMP process, they have now, where is it now? They now have a very huge, thick brochure they produced about the Verkehrsentwicklungsplan in Bremen, where everything is described. And this process lasted 2 years. It was very complex and demanding and time-consuming, but nevertheless it was very successful. Institutional cooperation, very crucial to cooperate, to work in partnership, because what we see is that you have an initiating authority, but it has limited planning competence. So they need partnerships and the collaboration with other departments and the support from other departments. Another point is that responsibilities might overlap between agencies, and there has to be a transparency who is responsible, and for that you also need responsibility, but also the assignment of responsibility. But there are huge barriers because there is a lack of awareness of partnerships and also a silo thinking. And the complexity of policy integration, it makes it very complex and sometimes very difficult to act within this complexity. And for the complexity of managing interests of large stakeholder groups is also very challenging. So to build focused thematic local partnership can help to have a partnership between all relevant institutions. But it could also be relevant or important to build new institutions if required. A good example for institutional cooperation is the West of England Partnership, where a joint local transport plan for the West of England was designed and four counciled cooperation cooperated in order to set up this plan. Measures selection. What I've just mentioned is that the measures and the method selection process is kind of the heart of an SUMP process and is the heart of an SUMP at the end. And what we realized is that there is an over-reliance on preconceived ideas and a lack of awareness of new measures which might be helpful for the city. There's a limited knowledge of good practices and their transferability, but also a focus on supply-side measures, more on infrastructure development rather than demand-side measures, and such as regulation, pricing. But there's also a limited evidence on measure impact to achieve intended policy goals, especially in specific city contexts. So what can be promising approaches? So, to avoid the temptation of good measures, but to follow a more systematic analytical process to identify strategic goals and measures to meet those effectively. And no one policy measure will be sufficient alone. Develop measure packages. A good example we have found at a partner city is the SUMP process, which has been carried out in the city of Dresden, also located in Germany. They developed their SUMP within the last 2 years, and they have designed, as well a very ambitious, they had a very ambitious stakeholder involvement process, and together with those stakeholders they set up a special decision-making process in order to identify appropriate measure. They have a they came up with a standardized methodology for the measure selection, and they developed 12 assessment criteria. So this this graph shows that they try to how they try to prioritize their measures in this kind of a matrix, and this was intensively discussed within a round-table debate, which was led by an external consultant, and all with in close cooperation with the city administration. Monitoring and evaluation, also another very important issue in SUMP, mainly important when an SUMP is already available in a city. And what we also realize is that there is only little experience with very comprehensive monitoring and evaluation processes. So there is limited experience and on how monitoring and evaluation should be managed and who should do it. There are different definitions for the indicators to be monitored. And very crucial, there's a low availability of data that relates to the SUMP and to its objectives. And there is a lack of knowledge how to monitor and evaluate not only the impact of measures, but of the whole SUMP development process. Promising approaches could be to follow up a systematic process to set up a local knowledge base of impacts with tested indicators, to apply cost-effective data collection, and to adapt methodologies to the city size. I can't go into that deeper now because I think that's very complex, and not in the solutions but in another European project we address especially this point of monitoring and evaluation much more in detail. And if you would like to check on the challenge project, then you are warmly invited. Vienna is, for example, a case study, a case where an SUMP has been developed within the last year, and also a very ambitious monitoring system has been set up, and that they develop a very communicative indicator and target scheme. And they asked our company to support them in their quality control system. Summary and conclusion from my side are that not only the local, SUMP is mainly a local task, and those processes I have just described, those challenges are the challenges mainly for the local level, but the EU and the national government should coordinate with legal frameworks and support the local activities with their frameworks, with funding schemes, with guidance. EU and national agencies need to further support exchange and learning process for cities to meet SUMP challenges more effectively. There need to be a long-term funding commitment for SUMP preparation and implementation as well. The private sector should be engaged in the SUMP funding and development process, and the private sector is normally already integrated into planning processes by when a city tenders certain tasks to a private sector, to the private sector. So but the SUMP concept, how it's existing, still needs to be adapted to different urban realities. Small cities, rural areas, regions face other, have other contacts and face other challenges, different challenges like bigger cities. Smaller cities have different, less capacities, and SUMP concept have to be adapted to this special needs. There should be a compliant with essential quality criteria of SUMP to be ensured, which should be ensured through quality control and certification schemes, so that the city knows how's the quality of the plan I have developed. So for us, SUMP is not only a European concept, but it's a concept which addresses strategically local planning processes with through an integrated planning process and meets global needs. And there is a need for more global exchange. Let me give you some additional information what we are currently carrying out. And we are in the Solutions project, we are currently running an SUMP e-learning course which has started on Monday, and we have already over 170 participants from 52 countries here showing this map. And there you can find interactive courses and a moderated forum, and you are very much invited to join this course. So a topic I have mentioned is your mobility plan an SUMP? Because there is no agreed and operationally usable definition of what constitute an SUMP. And how should you test your mobility plan if it compares to the guidelines, if it's in line with the guidelines and the European Urban Mobility Package? A question would be, can you meet the funding requirement from structural and investment funds and from banks, and how do you compare with other cities? What we would like to provide is in early summer 2015 is SUMP quality assessment, and it's a self-assessment which will be free of charge and online available. It's based on the Urban Mobility Package from the EU and the SUMP guideline, and is a transparent concept. It will be linked to training resources, and it's an assessment of the preparation processes and of the plan's content. And what we have and what the system will consist of, it's a very simple system of 100 questions. It's balanced across all mobility package categories to determine the level of compliance. And if you would be willing to participate as a test city for the self-assessment tool, we would be very delighted to gain from your insight and experience and your feedback. The last point I would like to make is that there will be a second European conference on SUMP. The last conference was took place for the first time last year in Sopot in Poland, and the next conference will take place in Romania, in Bucharest, on the 16th and the 17th of June of this year. And it will be an opportunity for mobility planners and implementers from all Europe to learn about the latest development in the field of SUMP and network between the various European projects. So I hope that gives you some insights, views into the challenges of SUMP, and we would like you to welcome either in our solutions e-learning course or on the SUMP conference, or also on in our challenge e-learning course, which will be go online end of this month. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Susanne, for your presentation. This was really interesting. Thank you for presenting the approach of sustainable urban mobility planning in Europe, as well as delivering actually the perspective of the EU as a supranational authority. What I'm especially happy is actually the fact that EU is opening up its capacity building programs to professionals from around the world, so I can really support the solutions program and invite also you as participants to look at this program and to participate there. What we will now move on to is a further generalization and more a look into the role of national levels and how they are connected with urban mobility planning. And I got from Susanne's presentation one keyword, and that is partnership. And so I would like to extend this partnership above the local levels to a partnership between different cities and the national level. We are going to explore how these two topics are further connected in the presentation. So if we look at the status quo in many parts of the world, we face a situation that cannot be generalized. It is not everywhere equal, but very often we can describe it as the following, that there is either a very strict regulation on how transport is planned in urban areas, or that we have quite non-existent regulations on urban mobility planning. And in most situations, we have quite limited guidance actually. So there's limited guidance to support local authorities on how to do a good urban mobility planning process. This of course may lead to a more infrastructure-oriented planning approach, which is focusing on serving the transport demand and more on motorized individual transport, what we have all heard also in former presentations, and which is the general discussion about sustainable urban transport. A second one is a more practical approach, which regards transport planners at a local level, that very often there's quite limited guidance on how to design convenient and safe infrastructures, meaning how to provide convenient and safe walkways, road intersections, crossings, as well as how to integrate a cycling infrastructure in urban areas. And if we have regulations, then sometimes they may be outdated or not anymore reflect the state of the art, but this is may refer to some countries and cannot be generalized again. And as the last point, we have particularly in developing countries and emerging economies, but I don't want to exclude further industrialized countries here, because still there the funding mechanisms are not in any cases always coordinated in a comprehensive manner, so that we have different responsibilities for transport funding at the national level, which support the implementation and the construction of transport projects, which not always is in line with overarching policy goals, with the limitation of greenhouse gases, transport emissions, and so on. So there may be a lack of priority setting due to inappropriate funding mechanisms. In reality, if we look further on the local level, I like the picture of the ivory tower of transport planning. And this is an example from Ukraine, where there is a quite strict regulation on how a planning process has to be conducted. You can look at the points, so you can look at the points at the row. So there is a decision. So according to the Ukrainian regulations, a city has to do such a general transport plan. The decision is taken by the city, and the city is tendering out this process actually to external consultant, mostly in the case of Ukraine it is a local planning institute. This institute then is drafting the plan, and already there is a point where there is a lack of description of the process. So these planning institutes don't understand themselves as an actor which is organizing a stakeholder dialogue between all the important stakeholders, which Susanne before mentioned in her presentation as well. But they mainly have an approach which focuses more on the provision of transport infrastructure and corridors. So they are drafting and developing this plan, which is then kind of reviewed by another planning institute, which is probably located in one of the other ivory towers in the bubble. And then just at point 5 there is an inclusion of public stakeholders in a kind of dialogue, but there is also no regulation on how the feedback from this process has to be feeded back into the transport plan. So we can see what all this can lead to is a strong focus on, let us say, infrastructure-oriented planning approaches, which focus rather on car transport or on other kind of public transport corridors, but may neglect the needs of pedestrians and cyclists. So you can see it here. We have a wonderful, in the upper right picture, we have a wonderful new road with 3 lanes, with three quite wide lanes, but the provision of crossing facilities is definitely not sufficient. In the downer right corner, there's a nice example for another neglect of a crossing. So we have that here. Another effect may be due to this focus on the movement of cars or on infrastructures. There may come out, this is also only a picture from a particular city, but you can get such a picture from many cities in the world. This shows us that there's probably a lack of proper traffic management, meaning a lack of transport demand management instruments. Susanne has explained it. Urban mobility planning is in this context understood by more and more cities worldwide as an interesting tool to conduct a process which is in an inclusive way dealing with all these challenges and trying to figure out a solution that is really locally feasible. But at the same time, if such an urban mobility plan is developed in a good and sustainable way, it may also contribute to more overarching policy goals like sustainable urban development, as a urban mobility plan is of course focusing on providing reliable, safe and efficient transport services to their citizens. In the same time, in such a process, probably the environmental and urban development challenges are identified and tackled with some solutions as far as they are in the power of the urbanity of the municipality. And if done in a proper way, an urban mobility plan or a mobility strategy can help to reduce social inequality, to provide all population groups with access to mobility options which allow them to access jobs, markets, as well as health service, education, and so on. So, and to make it more understandable that those goals which are in the interest of the national level, meaning getting big parts of the population out of poverty, to reduce the climate impact of a country, to improve the environmental situation and to reduce road fatalities, for example. These goals can be, if a national government or national level authorities understand these points and that transport is connected to all those issues, then the country can start to tackle these challenges with appropriate national urban transport policy. And this naturally involves provisions and instruments for urban mobility planning. The next point which is connected to this is, of course, institutions and legal frameworks which support the development and the implementation of sustainable transport solutions, which we also, within what I would also count all regulatory framework conditions as well as design guidelines, but also the sufficient capacities of at the local level to conduct the planning process. And what is also connected to this chain towards sustainable urban transport systems is, of course, the question of financing and funding. So we have quite vast opportunities of instruments which may help us to raise funds. And if we think more about sustainable transport financing, we should take this point and see which funds we can actually even take directly out of the transport sector without putting too much stress on general budgets, which will just take away these funds from other sectors. And at the end, of course, the way of appropriate spending and priority setting, because we have only limited funding, and there must be a certain way, a good way to spend the funds in the best way, and urban mobility plans may help us to find out which are the most important measures to invest in, as we could see from the example of the SUMP in Dresden. To go a little bit deeper into the question of financing, funding, as well as capacities, the following figure may help to understand. So one important part or one important tool that the national level has, and for which the national level is predestinated, is the shaping of funding mechanisms, as of course the national level, due to tax revenues, has far better possibilities to generate funding for investments in transport systems. In the same time, the national level can of course initiate capacity building programs. It can provide guidance to cities how to conduct planning processes. It doesn't mean that the national level has to do everything by themselves, but it can of course also support associations, or it can support professional associations, universities, in finding out what are optimal solutions, for example, with regard to particular road design guidelines. Also, the provinces sometimes have a certain role, which I don't want to go further into detail here with, but Susanne has already mentioned it. Transport planning should not end at the city border. It also has a regional impact. So, and depending on the particular local situation, regional authorities shall be involved. And coming then to the local levels should have, of course, access to funding to implement the most useful transport measures, and they require capacities to implement these measures, as well as they require capacities to conduct sound urban mobility planning. And if all these elements go together in a good way, that cities are supported by national level authorities and by other entities, this may be truly a way forward to move towards sustainable urban transport systems. I would like to go a little bit more deeper into the term of guidance, not to give a definite explanation, but what I would like what I understand among these facts. So is, on the one hand, we have a legal framework, we have planning regulations, which tell cities how planning processes have to be designed. This is the one hand. The other side are, of course, also guidelines of how mobility planning processes can be done in a good way. So there's, I don't know whether there's a real trade-off, but too strict regulations might often be not as effective as proper guidance may be. So we have that, this is quite good reflected in the character of the Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning Guidelines of the EU, which are not, it is not a regulation, it is rather a guiding document. Within these guidelines also I count these infrastructure design guidelines, and of course any other any other guidance on how to involve publics and how to involve the general public, how to do a good stakeholder process, and so on. A second huge element that I count also under the term of guidance are the regulatory framework conditions. So there's the one thing that an urban mobility planning process helps us to find out an appropriate set of measures, but it is also necessary that the local level authorities have the power to implement these measures which they found out. This means that they must have the opportunity and they must have the legal circumstances to do parking management, to apply parking policies and other, to charge transport surcharges and so on. This also includes operational guidelines for public transport, which allows actually setting up effective and high quality public transport systems. What adds up to the point of guidance is also the element of capacity building. So these regulations and guidelines, they are good to have and they are important. But in the same way, local planners, they must understand them, they must be able to apply them, because in the end, mobility planning is a local planning task. We can see at the moment that a lot of countries and a lot of national level authorities are taking urban mobility planning as one priority and are actively supporting local level authorities, as for example India with the concept of comprehensive mobility plans. They have developed in about 5 or 6 years ago the first guidelines for comprehensive mobility plans, and have quite some learning experience already. So the guidelines were revised in 2013, and they are still not ratified, but they are already available, so cities can use them for urban mobility planning at the local level. They had one interesting learning aspect, learning experience that they had was that the first generation comprehensive mobility plans, they were required to receive actually funding from the national government, so the cities were doing them, but the criteria to which such a comprehensive mobility plan should have been designed were not that well outlined, probably. So a lot of cities also outsourced this planning process, which was then less a planning process but the development of a master plan rather. And so these external consultants then in some cases have in a short time developed a transport strategy which has not been agreed probably and properly with all the necessary stakeholders, so that the strategy that was the outcome was not feasible in all cases. So this has then been addressed in the new policy guidelines in India, and we will see if it is now more successful. Brazil is following a similar approach. The first guidelines for mobility planning Brazil has already published in 2007. They have been revised in the last year after the ratification of the new law on urban of the new national policy on urban mobility. And what is an interesting aspect in Brazil is that the new law and includes the setting up of a comprehensive capacity building program to local professionals. And we will see how that will work out in practice. I'm interested and will keep an eye on that. So I'm already coming to an end, and to summarize a few main points. We have experienced that national level authorities have an important role to shape urban transport policies and planning frameworks. They have a power to design funding schemes, and they are in a role where they can organize guidance and further support for local levels. In the same time, we learned also from Susanne's presentation that local level authorities definitely need sufficient capacities to implement and do urban mobility planning in a proper way. And last but not least, it is definitely necessary to regularly evaluate existing policies as well as planning frameworks, which are probably most successful if there is a regular exchange between the national and local levels on what is necessary and what has to be improved. So yes, I would like to give you a hint to our latest publication once more. It is the document Urban Mobility Plans, which has been done in cooperation with Susanne from Rupesh Consult as well as with Christopher Kost from ITDP. You can find it now in 3 languages on our homepage. And here are some further documents from SUTP, which I will just skip through quickly now because we are almost at the end of our time. And yeah, you will also find some further sources and further links to some of the EO projects which have been mentioned in the first presentation. And so I would already like to open up the discussion. We have quite only a few minutes, so you are either welcome to continue your working tasks, have a good evening or a good day, or to stay with us a little while. I think we could spend some more 10 minutes to discuss some particular questions. So if you would like to raise a question, you're welcome to use the chat function first of all, and if we have some more time, also probably we will have a discussion via microphone where we can hear each other. So I see that we have already a question that I will open now. And there is a question from Francisco Luciano, which is directed rather to Susanne. As Susanne, she mentioned the private sector funding of SUMP. Is there an example where this is happening? So is there a city which actively uses private sector financing, and which companies are that? Susanne, are you still with us, and could maybe give us an example on that one?
Yes, I first have to unmute myself. Hi, Matthias. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I don't know if I understand the question right. Probably there was a misunderstanding that I've mentioned that a private sector is funding SUMP processes. That as far as I know, that the let's mention the example of Dresden, of Bremen, and I think also of Dresden. They have carried out their SUMP processes with own funding, with local money. So that it comes from the local budget, and they weren't financed by the private sector nor by the national or the regional level. But nevertheless, I know that in order to when implementing certain measures, that there are the private sector is integrated in the funding in funding schemes, like in public-private partnerships. So, but what I'm speaking, what I have more focused is that beside of this implementation of measures, I think it's very crucial to integrate the private sector and the private business also in the planning process, and to give them a say in the planning process, because they are very important stakeholders in city development, and they are shaping sometimes very intensively the size of the city in itself, especially when we're talking about big industry which might be located in the city, but I also see that there are major difficulties by integrating the private sector in such planning processes continuously, I would say. I think that's a huge challenge to do. So if you think about engaging the citizens, or if you engage really very huge companies, for example, so then you have really to design your participation process in accordance to this target group, because I think those target groups speaks a very different language, and as well have very different interest in the planning process and the outcome of the planning process.
Yes, thank you. That was your answer, how Francesca Luciano is telling that. I don't know if we have any more questions. If you still have a question, please feel welcome still to ask. Otherwise, I would already slowly forward to provide you some further information on where you can find some information, because I have some slides. Otherwise, please, yeah. 1 second. Yes, so I would like to one more time give a hint to our capacity building platform, Capsuit. Here you can have, here you can find a lot of different trainings, online courses and webinars on sustainable urban transport, as well as when you are from an institution or from an organization, you are invited to publish your own courses here. You will also find a lot of information on our work from GIZ in the field of transport and mobility at this slide. The whole presentation will be published after in a few hours online, so you can find all those links there. And connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, for example. You can find an extensive picture database which you may use for publications or presentations, and a lot of more information. So if there are no more questions, I would say thank you to all of you. Thank you for stepping in, and I hope you had a good webinar giving you some implications for your further work. And yeah, thank you and goodbye, and thank you also to Susanne.